This is trolley 28 in Lisbon, and it takes us on a loop through the old part of town, including Alfama. Now climbing uphill into the Alfama. Get so close, and we will get closer if you can reach the side of the window if you wanted to quickly, of Here we are in the National Coach Museum. We'll take a look at these magnificent coaches of yesteryear. The room itself is spectacular. It looks like the kind of place that kings and noble people would throw great balls. It's interesting when you're reading Alexander Dumas stuff and they talk about coaches. If only I had these images implanted in my mind so I could really appreciate what was being said. I knew enough about these to know which one was which. From 1790. Here a couple of low slung, and this one quite open, this one much enclosed. But how heavy they look. What's interesting is how much of a step this looks like. There had to be a better way of getting into these. And the system of suspension here with leather straps. Given the quality of the best of roads, a ride in this of any long distance was a grinding trip. Not something we could appreciate or relish. And often the carving as well as the paintings are done by masters of their art at the time. You wonder if the people who rode these consistently had one that they in particular liked, or whether they thought one had a better ride than another. Look how massive the back end of this thing was. The pomp that this implied. It's like looking at the Chinese emperor's boats or the Thai boats in Bangkok Museum. So rich. Who besides the coachman ever got close enough to these to appreciate those cupids that embellished this one? And the typical outfits of the coachmaster, or whatever he was called. Notice the slope of the front window, more so on this one than the one before it. Was that purposeful to reduce the amount of rain that came down, or somehow otherwise improving visibility? This arced edifice here part of the suspension system, or is it just part of the structure that holds the overall carriage, front and back? And certainly you would have had a coachman or two riding on the back here. This carriage just seems to reek of gaudy gold as opposed to any kind of elegance, except that someone would have perceived this as exactly elegance and beauty. And look, as we progress down the line of coaches, the increase in embellishment of the embellishments on the roof. Until here you cap it out with an incredible set of crowns and other thingies. And as I pan here, you can see, as to length at least, if not overall size, the increase in the size over time, assuming that we've come from an earlier time to a later time of these particular coaches. And these three coaches seem to have their greatest attribute in the rear end, with these sculptures, 4 of them there. Think of this, just so that some imperial bastard can ride around in a ceremony looking even more imperial. And they tolerated this stuff. Perhaps as we do with limousines and 747s or whatever the latest version of the presidential plane is. Notice from these coaches we've gone from hard-sided painted ones to fabric embroidered sides. And very open this one was. And I'm confident these represent some historical, probably Greek allusion or Roman allusion. And this little rig would have been carried by 2 mules. There with a table inside, of course. So one could go out and have a picnic if it started to rain in the carriage. No big surprise. You'd think they'd have come up with a van. This is pretty small. And these probably have certain names like cabriolet, blah, blah, blah. Names that are given to some cars in the past as an allusion to these magnificent vehicles. I don't know if this is a joke or if this is something someone actually has had used, whether it was people that carried it or what. Certainly as a sedan chair where it would be used is interesting. Or a sedan chair carried by humans. This would be not uncommon for a man to use getting about a town. A woman. This probably for carrying some religious memorial in a parade. Not at all uncommon in many countries today in some form or another. It's wonderful that these are restored and preserved. And it's interesting in how it gives the rider or the men operating at a much higher vantage point than most. And notice how these have lanterns, at least to warn people that you're coming. The suspension system not radically different. Imagine how being rocked on the bad roads of their day, you would, if you were a human in one of these, just be swinging back and forth. It's interesting how it might be put on a horse using a saddle attachment. What a gay blade and his girl might whip around the park on this. As you see in some of those period pieces from the BBC. Huh. There, that to have ice. The ultimate in wet rain gear. This was considered fast and strong, as well as the benefit that it could be operated while you were dry, the rain's going through that hole in the bottom and the middle, and you could still see out through those front windows. And some of these, or all of these that we've been looking at just in the last bit, are perhaps called cabriolet. Section probably tipped forward. Once you're inside, you pulled it back, using that little handle there in the middle. Or if they had little cabriolet dealerships like we have automobile dealerships, and you go down and select the one that you liked. And this is called a landau. It's a traveling vehicle. Whether that means long distance or whatever, I don't know. But notice the rubber on the wheels. Pretty good lamps and covers that could be put up to give you protection. But even on those bad roads, if you had more than a few riding in the opposite direction in the wind, you'd be inundated with dust, it would seem like, and bumpy, because probably, notice we have a different suspension system with springs. These are hunting horns. I don't think they were used in conjunction with this kind of hunting. But imagine the good and the bad trips that certain individuals made in here. What their thoughts were as they jounced and bounced along the... And of course, to those in the know, each of these could be recognized for its owner and presumed occupant. Imagine these kids just pretty much akin to slave owners' kids, plantation owners' kids, and a built-in arrogance of the nobility. It's interesting how my disdain for it and lack of fear of it is almost inherent in my American psyche compared to the couple that I spoke with at that B&B that I had dinner in with a British couple who were very sensitive to the owners of the hostel's lineage versus their own. And if you ever wonder if women actually wore such mantles, this is Queen Amelia's mantle. It probably took some skill and strength to carry that down an aisle. Just imagine the power and the grandeur implied by those who saw such vehicles roll by with their important personages inside. Do you think the guy that rode back here found it difficult to get this image, of which he was perhaps the only one who actually spent much time looking at it, out of his mind at night when he tried to sleep? And did this fellow imagine flirting with these two women? Did he have fantasies about them as they rode along the bumpy roads? This is such a rich, colored, aesthetically rich unit. This one interesting because of its age, presumably much older than these others. Notice that there were individual panes of glass. Did that reflect a period of time when glass was really expensive and difficult to make? And is that hole what I think it is? A toilet? I would hope so. Just different saddles of the era, including one, a gaucho saddle from Brazil, of course, one of the colonies. Look at the size of that stirrup. Here we approach the Monastery of St. Jerónimos. This guy here. Here a little bit closer, Pan.
Pelos Santos Padres, o Papa Francisco, pelo Sr. Patriarca, pelos pais que criam os educadores dos filhos, para que o Senhor os ajude a fazerem crescer na sua família a união e a paz do seu amor. Oremos ao Senhor. Pelas nossas professoras, para que, iluminadas pelos dons da ciência e do conselho, secundem os pais ensinando com palavra e exemplo os valores humanos e cristãos referentes ao Senhor. Todos os que se esforçam em aperfeiçoar o apoio do colégio terão 35 anos de vida às famílias, para que o Senhor os pague imensamente.
So we're now in the cloister, which is very large, and the inner portion is what I can see is going to be very pretty, but I'll take a quick look at this. Beautifully restored, of course.
eu não tinha apertado direito.
Bota não?
Não tinha apertado direito.
It's hard to get a grasp of the size of this. Extremely large and very dramatic.
Coloca aqui que tá mais
It's
vazio.
Manueline, in other words, Art Deco to the max kind of thing. If you ever had any doubts about the power of the Catholic Church, all you have to do is compare some of their monasteries and churches like this one and cathedrals with forts. Certainly they rival, if not exceed them in size. The mere fact that you find coats of arms in a cloister like this gives you an idea of the connection between the power political and the power Catholic. And it's hard to imagine that the priests and or nuns that wandered these cloisters did not understand and have some questions about the connection between the power, political and religion, although it was so intertwined and so presumed that I doubt they would question it if they did have a question like that. The irony is that this huge complex was built on the site of an original simple little chapel that sailors would pray in before they took off onto the ocean. I've commented before about how these cloisters often have at least one ancillary chapel in a corner. This one happens to be in a corner and very, very large. Of course, befitting the size of this complex. Who and what it was intended for, I don't know. But there he is. And the gargoyles are of different animals, including monkey and lion and so forth. Probably reflective of the fact that the Gama had gone to those different countries that had such animals in them. Probably used to be a nice fountain in the center too, but tourists don't really need that. And here is a lion fountain, a small one. Perhaps it once stood there. Or maybe it was looking at what once was in the center. Now we're on the upper floor of the two-story cloister. A little simpler, but pretty nevertheless. And the portals are pretty because of those dingle-dangles on the top there. It's interesting how these devices look like flying buttresses, and probably to some degree perform that service, but it may be only for the outside, in other words, the devices to the right, those little pedestals, rather than the large pedestal to the left. Hard to make this out. It looks like a dog. Certainly looks like a pig from here, as well as over there. Looks like a person. That looks like a monkey. Hippopotamus? Busts of somebody up there. Man and woman, actually. It occurred to me that with a place this large, you must be looking for themes, for detail, to fill up the space, like were these circular different icons of different nobles' crest of arms or something? That certainly looks like it. I don't know if you can see it, and I don't know if it's intended. I suspect to some degree it is, but not perhaps all of it. And that is the slope from my right, from the inside of the hall towards the outside garden area of the cloister. In other words, that smaller wall. Same thing here. I think you can see it. That guy's actually walking uphill. Now what's interesting is I pan around. Look at this corner. You can see cracks. And you can see what I'm guessing are structural engineers' devices for recording size of those cracks. Here a real sense of the choir's position on the second floor, looking down towards the altar. I can denigrate the church all I want, but the image of a man, and they're worth thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, hanging from crosses is one of the most reprehensible acts of man. When you're in a place like this, all you can do is be awed by the dimension. And when you add to it your superstitious belief in God and all of the trappings that the church and its chicanery and duplicity creates, you've got to be absolutely awed if you're an ignorant person. And apparently, even if you're not. Churches are amazing edifices. This is a Renaissance altar, but it's being restored, so we'll poke past the curtains if we can to see what we can see. Presumably there are three of the confessional doors that Rick Steves speaks about. The second one apparently has graphics of the various kinds of knots that sailors used. I don't think I'll be able to see it from here, but we'll try to get in a little bit closer and see if we can see that. No, it's not that. Here is the tomb of Vasco da Gama, who apparently prayed in the little chapel that was here before he left on his trip. Fascinating and charisma. This is the second confessional on the right, and as Rick Steve points out, it has the faces of characterizing some of the different peoples that lived in the different lands that were discovered as a result of da Gama's travels. So I'll just pan slowly down through them. There was a guide chatting here a few moments ago, probably gave a better description of it. And somewhere here you perhaps could find such a better description. Here directly above Vasco da Gama's tomb is the display of various knots that the sailors would use. And we won't be able to see them all in detail, but I'll try to show a couple of them. This, for example, looks somewhat like a square knot, but I think it may be a bowline. And if we were knowledgeable, we could probably tell what these knots were. Yeah, this definitely looks like a square knot from here. Now, Steve suggests that these are a veritable litany of the knots used. I don't see that. I see repetitious knots for design effect. I'm in the gardens right across the street from the monastery, and we'll amble along the waterfront here in a moment, explore the park, and then go back to Lisbon. It's a pretty park, nicely maintained, as one would expect. Cute little taste of Asia. I would guess it was Thailand. Here another section of the park, not quite so many people in it. This statue, probably Vasco. He is rightfully one of the great heroes of Portugal. What an incredible voyage it must have been go around Africa, particularly the Horn, which is supposed to be so outrageously dangerous. Stopping at countries that had never seen white men. Okay, this is one of the main squares, maybe the main square down here in the Baisha area, the old town. And off to my right is another fairly large one, and to the upper right of that is still another.